Unputdownable Chapter 6. I sat on the backrest of the front seat, which had been crushed off its hinges in the now crumpled and upside-down car. My attempt to start the Stadia by voice had been successful. It was my car. Some surviving part of the onboard computer had verified my voice and then falteringly attempted to start the motor, which had instead started a small fire. But Stadias were known for their extravagant safety features, and destroyed as it was, a turbulence of chemical foam seeped from a floor panel and dolloped around the area of the fire. Little white clouds surrounding a yellow mountain. Not putting it out exactly, but containing it. The Zodiac full of drunken sailors rumbled closer, and I took a readying breath when the engine quieted. Voices whistled out the coldness of the water as the sailors splashed into the sea and fought for shore. If they hadn't seen me running across the beach, maybe I had a chance. Maybe they'd find me handcuffed in the wreckage and think, what? I didn't know. That I'd been taken hostage and sent off a cliff? If they fell for that, maybe they'd bring me back to the quarter-past quay, undo the handcuffs, buy me a beer at Allison's fish place, rescue me instead of whatever else was more likely. But at the moment, despite the arrival of the sailors and the sputtering car fire, I didn't care. I was too relieved, overjoyed even, that no sign of Allison could be found in the car. The front seat airbags had deployed, but they looked laundry fresh, deflated, but mostly clean, unimpacted somehow. I saw no blood, no shoes or bits of torn clothing anywhere. No signs that a skull or body part had slammed into the console or mostly shattered windshield. I decided to officially conclude that Allison had not been in the car when it went off the cliff, which also made it seem necessarily, and I guess officially, true that neither had the driver associate with the golden watch. If Allison and Goldwatch, as I decided to call him, had somehow exited the car, did that mean Goldwatch had decided to take Allison for himself, cut Z out of whatever happened next? Hypothetically, a relief. Hypothetical relief, anyway, as though I was safer now assuming this was a kidnapping and not something more sinister. I had money. I could pay for a ransom. But if it was something else? The sailors grumbled and laughed as they gathered around their stolen, now ruined boat, assessing the damage, drinking, grunting, laughing. They sounded angry. More than that, they sounded happy to be angry. While I watched the fire and waited for them to find me, I realized I'd lost my messenger bag somewhere. I'd had it with me when I left the Crystal Ball Cafe, but along the way, in the taxi or running through the park or stealing the Zodiac, I'd left it, forgotten it. I could sift through my film strip memory and find the exact moment we parted company, but that could wait. I closed my eyes instead and reviewed the footage of Z emerging from the car. I wanted to see if there was any sign of Goldwatch's betrayal. I watched Z emerge from the wreckage like a strange snake, piece by piece, and then his broken, somehow pain-free jaunt across the beach. "We're so looking forward to your novel," he'd said. His tone hadn't been chilling, but his certainty was. Eerie, anyway, almost congratulatory, as though my book was at that very moment being set on shelves in bookstores and libraries everywhere. But it wasn't, and I wasn't the novelist he'd recognized me as. Far, far from it. Allison had started me out writing, given me the notebook and pen at the hospital. "Write down what you remember of your life before," she'd said. It'll help you get your feet on the ground, give you a sense of what's happening now, where you are, who you are. She was suggesting a kind of therapeutic journal, but I'd been reading thriller and mystery books in the hospital. That was all they had on the little cart they rolled around. The dying and the miserable must only like stories about people more miserable and dead than themselves. The stories I liked best, the compulsive wild rides that I fell asleep reading, all had the same quality. I couldn't put them down, and didn't put them down until they fell onto my face. Had all in fact usually been branded with that single word, unputdownable, as attributed to some influential celebrity or famous book reviewer. So I decided to write one of those as my therapy, the sort of book you couldn't put down. If Z or K had been watching me, they might have seen the exact words I wrote at the top of every page. Every single one of my journal entries began like this: Unputdownable, a novel by Richard Spring, Chapter 1. It gave me a little kick, a thrill to be, well, supremely overconfident, as though my book was, in fact, about to be placed on shelves in libraries and bookstores everywhere. Unputdownable the book came before Unputdownable the boat. The book I can't write came before the boat I can't sail. The sailboat was an inspirational part of my new life as a writer. It seemed a very writerly thing to have and do, a boat to sail when I wasn't writing. When he's not writing unputdownable bestseller books, Richard Spring enjoys sailing around the world. I imagined my author blurb reading. In fact, when I had trouble writing, which was almost always, unless some sinister-seeming scene happened to be playing out before my eyes, I sometimes wrote variations of my author blurb. In these I was always a best-selling novelist and sailor, but sometimes I was married to someone I'd given the code name A. While A very much loved and supported her husband, A wished to maintain her own personal and private life. She wished to remain anonymous, and demanded I call her only A, which I initially claimed stood for anonymous. But then I wondered if Allison was catching on during her nightly read-throughs of my journal. So after a time I began to call her B, to throw her off the trail I actually hoped she'd find. I was waiting for her to say, "Who the hell is this A?" And then maybe I'd blush, and then maybe she'd know. The problem was my state of mind. I was still recovering, not yet myself, still lost some mysterious distance away from who I was. Falling in love with anyone passing by seemed like the sadly common habit of convalescence, a symptom of healing, maybe, or just being closely cared for. So it seemed somehow illegitimate that she'd call it a fantasy, so I kept it to myself in my kind of sort of way. But giving the boat the same name as the book felt like a handshake, an agreement. The boat was real, so maybe the book was real too. It didn't matter that I was a poor sailor and a bad writer. I had a boat that floated, and many, many chapter 1s written. That was almost something. That was pretty much enough. And there was nothing I liked more than fantasizing about Unputdownable the book hitting the shelves as Unputdownable the boat hit the waves, and I began a trip around the world with A. "What are you doing in there, fellow?" a voice suddenly called. There was a German or Dutch knot in the sounds, as though each word had been neatly tied inside itself. An enormous tanned face pushed through the jagged vent. A puffy mohawk of blonde hair crossed the top of his head, and his sun-wrinkled skin reminded me of a loaf of bread. I saw his name, Lars, on the nameplate below his left eye. "Oh," I moaned. "Oh, my God, am I alive?" This was a bad performance, but it was a quiet performance. If Lars had had trouble hearing me, he might have bought it. But he turned to the sailors behind him. "He wonders if he's alive," he said. They laughed. Lars laughed. I gave another quieter performance to see if that would help. "Oh, my God," I whispered. How did you find me, my friend? My friend, Lars echoed happily, and turned once more to convey the good news to his comrades. Look here, Cram, he said. Come meet my new friend. The stone-like face of Cram peered in. His black hair traced like stitches over the top of his shaved scalp. These were not promising haircuts. They knew this. They had to. They had removed their little black caps simply to scare me. Which, actually, double scared me. If you're frightened not only of someone's hair, but by the fact that they'd removed their hats to scare you with their haircuts, imagine how terrified you'll be when they actually begin to bear down. Oh, Cram gasped, as though he'd had a tough time spotting me in the wreckage. There you are. Am I a new friend too, fellow? He asked. His voice was higher, the accent softer, French, perhaps. Yes, I whispered, barely audible now. Thank you for rescuing me. You are my new friend as well. Oh. Lars pulled Cram roughly out and shoved his loaf-of-bread face back in. Well, friend, he said, we are looking for someone who is not a friend, an enemy, who stole and destroyed. And here Lars grew troubled and tipped back to the others behind him. Destroyed, yes? Lars said to them. Destroyed, the voices called back in unison. Disturbing unison. Voices coming together to join as one is usually a charming thing. Not here. They scared you with their frightening hair strips and played along with your friend games, and then they said things in unison. My stomach was turning to ice. But then again, the fear might make my performance a little more convincing. Yes, Lars continued sadly. Our enemy ran it aground. Popped it on the rocks is the main problem. But then as well, the other problem is the blade of the thing. The propeller, I said. My voice quavered nicely. With fear, yes, but conceivably, from Lars' point of view, my pain and suffering from falling off a cliff in a car. Propeller, yes, my friend, the propeller is broken, Lars said. His features squirmed again with confusion. Valentine, he called back. Propeller on a boat. Propeller, the voice came back. A woman's voice, a commanding voice, an English voice, upper class but cut and guttural, as though black smoke poured from her mouth when she spoke. With that one smoky word, I knew this Valentine was in charge. Lars and Cram and all the rest were variations of K, henchmen. But V was their Z. I thought propeller was airplanes, Lars shrugged. Also airplanes, yes, I said, helpfully. We have different words in Norway, Lars said. Propellen for boat, and different one for plane. I don't remember. We should have been more discriminating ourselves, I said. Come up with different words. Oh, yes, friend, Lars said, and dragged a hand over his bloody face as though hoping to grab a chunk of it. That is it exactly. You should have been more discriminating. He reached a leg-like arm in and hauled me out and stood me prop-like before his fellow sailors. Then he gently dusted me off, presentation style. Look how easy, he said to the group. We can even skip second step. He yanked at the handcuffs behind my back, which must have been their step 2. Are you going to arrest me? I asked. Good idea, friend. Can we? Lars asked. And here, their captain, or leader, Valentine, finally stepped forward to answer. In fact, she'd been sitting on the shore, smoking an odd brown cigarette and gazing out to sea, lifting a large bottle of vodka to her lips now and then, as though all alone on a faraway island. Valentine kept her black cap on. A tight braid of red hair danced over one shoulder like a strange little pet. Are we police, sir? Valentine asked Lars. No, not exactly, Lars said. Not At all, sir, Valentine said. And as she stepped closer, I saw that her outfit bore no insignia, police, military, or otherwise. The matching blue uniforms and black caps of the sailors were more like the coveralls of old movie musical custodians or mechanics. Disturbingly, their outfits bore the single word "Colog" in a black stitched panel over the pocket. I'd heard the word before, but didn't know what it meant. More than that, Allison had told me what the Colog was several times, but I couldn't keep the information in my head. "Who are you, then?" I asked. Valentine smiled crookedly. Or maybe it wasn't a smile. Her face, at least, collapsed strangely to his side. "Rogues, sir," she said, which seemed less an answer to my question than a way to find out if I'd heard of them. I had not, and told her so. "That is what the Colog calls us now, sir," Valentine said. "We used to be interception officers," Lars said, "flying around. A very nice life, very good food. Before the war, we all work on submarines of all these different navies, radar technicians, except Valentine, who was submarine captain, but also radar technician. That was also a nice life. Food was okay." "But unfortunately, sir," Valentine said, "none of us was very good at being very good. So now we are so-called rogues. Lucky for us, they don't like to modify their specialists. They might need us again one fine day. So we walk around, sir, hither and yon, do what we like, follow our noses, free as birds, sir." I was saying things, out loud, asking questions, but a kind of haze had crept over my awareness, almost like I was bobbing in and out of consciousness in such a way that I couldn't tell that I was bobbing. I guess this was an obvious manifestation of fear. I was in deep trouble now, and I knew it. I was maybe teetering on the edges of shock, about to faint. I must have been. "Not at all, sir," Valentine said, in response to some question I must have asked. "Not yet, anyway. The Colog like it very much, in fact. We are peacekeepers of a kind. They have virtually no presence, so we give them that. And a certain luster, a certain darker reputation." "Everyone hates us," Lars said happily, and bottles were raised and clinked in a toast. Lars even pressed the bottle to my lips, and a handful of rum splashed down my chin. "But unlike the Colog, sir, we don't come in peace," Valentine said. Her face again fell in a heap to one side. I didn't even notice when I fainted. I was there, and then I was not. A switch had been thrown. I hadn't known this about fainting. I thought you were pretty much present all the way down, flailed out an arm, muttered some final obvious words, "I'm fainting," and then you went down in a kind of slow motion. But that's not how it works. You just turn off. When I turned back on, we were on the Zodiac. My clothes were wet, and they had me on the floor of the dinghy, and we were bumping over the waves. "Because we are revolutionaries, my friend," Lars was saying. I don't know if I asked something, or they just enjoyed explaining themselves. "The Colog knows we will do something soon that they won't like," Cram said. "But we haven't done it yet. Yet!" "Yet!" the sailors cried in their disturbing unison. "But, friend, of course," Lars said. "They also know they can stop us without even trying, so they let us be. When we do what we do, they will stop it. Or so they think." There was laughter and drinking, and for some reason someone was taking off my shoes. "Where is your nameplate, sir?" Valentine asked, and touched at the skin below my left eye in the way Z had back on the beach. In fact, someone was now unbuttoning my shirt, and my pants had been tugged down around my ankles. I said something about nameplates. Maybe I just said nameplates in a groggy, questioning tone. "Size 10, Lars said, astounded at his good fortune. He had my shoes in his hands and was holding them up proudly, like a pair of decent fish he'd just caught and couldn't wait to eat. He began to untie his own shoes and then put mine on. Lars took me by the neck and ankles and hoisted me over the side and set me in the water. The large man took hold of the mass of my pants between my ankles, and as I dragged alongside the Zodiac, I realized I had to press my legs strenuously outward to not only keep my pants on, but keep myself connected to Lars, which was not an easy thing to do, which also meant that very shortly I would tire and my legs would slacken and my pants would begin to unfurl from my ankles and Lars would release me, and I would begin to sink in the ocean the way a man without shoes, handcuffed and pants-cuffed, did, slowly and sadly, with a minimum of fuss. "Are you a prisoner, sir?" Valentine asked. I was not, and said so, through mouthfuls of seawater. Lars pulled me closer and held his breath and stared into my probably startled eyes. "I can't tell if he's lying," he said finally. "Cram?" Valentine said, and Cram leaned over the side and put his stone face up to mine. "No idea. Too wet to tell," he said. "I was in the hospital," I said. "And?" Valentine said. "They removed it, maybe. I don't know," I said. "They don't do that, sir," she said. "But you know who doesn't have them?" Cram said. I said I didn't. I'd begun to press the back of my head down into the water. This, I learned quickly, created a kind of pressurized bowl around my neck, which allowed me to hear them as well as possible under the circumstances. "Members of the collective organization, firstly, the Kolag," Lars said. "And all the crazy people," Cram added. "And prisoners," Lars said. "When you go to prison, they remove it. Or crazy in the hospital, they take it off. So if you escape, everyone can see what you are, prisoner or crazy." "Are you insane, sir?" Valentine asked. I shook my head in the negative, and water blasted across my face as my pressure bowl collapsed. I was swiftly heading back into fainting territory. "You stole our boat. Perhaps you are a thief," Lars suggested. "Perhaps you escaped from the prison." "No," I called out. "You can tell us," Cram said. "The Kolag doesn't care." Valentine nodded, and Lars drew me forward, and Cram tipped a bottle over my face. Rum, again. Caramel sweet, with a piratey kick. I opened my mouth to drink it down. Not because I wanted to drown a little less sober, but because that's the only choice when someone pours liquid over your face. Drink or choke. "They don't care about what?" I asked, pushing my head back into the water. My thighs were burning, and the alcohol seemed to be heading directly for my legs. "If you escape," Cram said, "they don't care. Good riddance. But this is something we do. If we see someone without a plate, we do some things to them. Crazy person, prisoner, push them over there onto the ground, drag them around in the water. But that's all. So have no fear. You won't be going back to prison." He smiled down at me and spilled the remaining rum into my mouth. "I'm not a prisoner. I didn't escape, and I'm not crazy," I said. Valentine's face slanted crookedly again. "Let me ask you this, then, sir," Valentine said. "Have you ever heard of something called—" And here she took a wrinkled piece of paper from her pocket and read a single word from it. "Skyrocket," she finished. She folded the paper neatly in half and slid it back into her pocket as though it was precious. I didn't tell them Skyrocket was my company, but I admitted that I'd heard of it. "Heard of what, sir?" she said. "I have heard of that company," I said. "And the name of this company, please, sir, if you wouldn't mind repeating it." "Skyrocket," I said. Valentine held the piece of paper once again in her hand, as though needing to confirm that what I'd said matched what was written. She nodded rather gravely to the sailors. "We have been looking for it, sir," she said, "but the Colog has dislocated it." "The Colog has what?" I said. "Dislocated it very firmly, sir," Valentine said. "Even if I was standing before a tall building that bore the word Skyrocket in bright letters at the top, and there were children singing Welcome to Skyrocket in the courtyard, and a man walked out and I said, 'Is this Skyrocket?' and he said yes, I would keep walking down the street looking for Skyrocket. But we found it once, and I have the name and the fact that we found it once written down on this paper. Even the name is not something we can remember." "I know where it is," I said. Valentine twirled a finger in the air and the engine cut, and she stood and called out, "Cram, back to shore, sir." As Cram turned the Zodiac for the quarter-past key, Lars pulled me from the water and lay me on the floor of the dinghy. "What's happening now? Where are we going?" I asked. "You are taking us to Skyrocket, my friend," Valentine said, again reading the word off her scrap paper. "But first you must listen to me very closely, or suffer the consequences. You will need to be very prepared for our arrival at Skyrocket, because we will not believe you, sir. We will refuse to enter the building. More than that, we will probably beat you, accuse you of lying to us. That is how powerful this dislocation is. Your challenge, sir, will be to figure out how to get us inside." "How will I do that?" I asked. "That is your challenge, my friend," Valentine said. I nodded toward her vodka bottle, and she tipped it to her own lips and drank. "As mentioned, my friend," Valentine began, "there are only 3 class types without nameplates: members of the Colog, prisoners, and the insane. But there is one other, not a type, but a person. One person, sir." Valentine drew a brown cigarette from her pocket and lit it as she raised her bottle in a way that caused the others to raise their bottles in a toast of victory. "My final question, sir, is this, though I believe I know the answer," she said. "If you are not a prisoner, and not insane, and not Colog, there is only one thing left, sir." And here, once again, she referenced her scrap paper. "Is your name Richard Spring?"